good 20 minutes to get into a conversation. And I think I hope we can move quickly to that. We really wanted this session to be an opportunity for people to have a conversation about this kind of issue that it's going on, and for you to first ask questions about any issues that were not clear with respect to this story or the role of private equity, and then to get into also hearing from you about whether you have experienced these kinds of issues or what you think the solutions are. So first, Carter or Rich, do you want to comment on anything?
Just like that, thank you for your patience with the technical challenges. You didn't get the sort of background music, at least I didn't. I'm not sure if others did. But that now you see the end of that story that I alluded to, which is first they moved it to Mexico, then they realized they didn't know what the hell they were doing, and they just looted the company down to its screws and bankrupted it and left everybody hanging. Just a little note, you saw that we are recording the session. That won't leave ILR. That's just in case people want to go back and take a look. But happy to answer any questions you have. It's there's a lot to go on here, but I'll just say I could tell a story like this about a lot of companies in this country. Toys R Us would be a big one that was alluded to. You heard a reference to Shopco in there. That was another one that was a private equity owned firm in they had locations in Wisconsin, retail, and then you heard a reference to the Waukesha Dairy. That was another one down the road from Janesville in Wisconsin that OpenGate bankrupted. That was actually a Teamsters organized dairy. The Teamsters were so pissed off they sent one of their trucks full of people to the demonstration that you saw there. Rose?
Okay, yeah, let's open it up. And I'm going to try to be very, I'm pretty good at like taking people in the order in which they put up their hands. Either just wave at me or put up your hand. And also, I really would encourage those who have been, without video, if you can put on your video, it does make things a lot more exciting to see faces. And I know that some people may not want to, but if you can, I always, my classes are always so much more exciting when we see people and people are engaged. And so to the extent that you feel comfortable doing that, please do. And then we'll get going with a conversation. I'll try to take like maybe 4 or 5 comments or questions, and then we'll open it up. If you want to, as an audience, respond to a given comment, then raise your hand right away, and then I'll try to get a conversation going as well around a given topic. So
And if you'd
yes,
like to throw a question in the chat, that's fine too.
Yeah. But I think I'm not very good at looking at the chat, so someone else will have to monitor that.
I'll do that, Rose.
Carter, you can do that. Okay, Richard Resnick.
Thank you, Professor.
No, I'm Rose. I'm Dr. Rose.
Okay, thank you, Rose. So the question I have, or the comment is, to the extent you're not going to influence the ones who are running OpenGate or these equities, it seems to me you've got to go after the people who are putting money in there. And do they identify who's contributing? And do we know if union pension funds, to try to get returns on their money, are investing in these private equity?
Great question. And there are some of these questions I know the answer to, so I may respond immediately, but let me see if we can get a couple of other questions before I respond to that one. Other questions? Okay, I'm going to give you guys some chance to think about these things. And we can go into, there are a lot of Ruth. Okay, let me take Ruth Schimmel. You need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Sorry about that. By now I should know how to do that. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, let me put my video back on so you can see my expressions. I'm really concerned that private equity has all the power. They're holding all the cards. What's offsetting them?
I'm sorry, what is?
What powers are offsetting them? Where's the voting power in legislature? What kind of exposure are they getting through journalism?
Right.
I mean, the case is there. The people are suffering. It's a disgusting situation. It reminds me of what happened before unions came into power.
Great question.
You want to tackle the first one, Rose?
If there's someone else, I don't have everyone on my screen. If there's someone else who is raising their hand, otherwise I can take these couple.
I see Laura Byrne raising her hand.
Okay, Laura.
Yeah, I should tell you, my grandfather, so my dad was from Janesville. My grandfather worked at the GM plant, as did two of my uncles. So it really hit home. And I do know some people that work in private equity. So I guess one question I have is around, I'm under the impression there are tax benefits to people who work in private equity. So it feels very, if that's true, it feels very slanted.
Right. Okay, let me take a shot at these three. And Robert, did you want to add?
Another quick question. Generally, most of these plants, or at least the ones that you've mentioned, have had unions attached, have been organized. And I'm wondering if there's any preemptive ways of negotiating language in their collective bargaining agreements that might be protective in these situations that would be binding should successors take over, and or well, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Myron.
I was going to ask about carried interest and how that incentivizes, but these companies are being sold. Is there some commonality to the characteristics of the vulnerability to outside purchases, or the incentives that bring them to want to betray what seems to be, in this case, a generation or two of trust that existed between the employees and the owners?
Okay. So I'm going to take a stab at some of these and try to bring them together, and then other folks can join in. There's first some that revolve around solutions, like the pension fund issue and where's the countervailing power. And then there are these specifics on taxes and the carried interest. So first of all, pension funds, there are very conflicted. There is a group at Harvard called the Institute for Responsible Investing. David Wood is a person who is organized the labor representatives to pension funds to try to get them to understand the allocations to private equity and to try to get the pension funds to stop investing. The pension funds are, unfortunately, a lot of the trustees do not really understand private equity, or they defer to the staff. And my take, and it's not necessarily, I have some evidence, my take is the staff continues to want to support private equity because private equity uses something called the internal rate of return, which is a return that magnifies private equity fund returns and makes them look good, even though this measure is not comparable to like the public markets. Like, so the staff benefit from private equity investments. There is also a lot of political support for private equity firms. And so if pensions were to try to not invest, that, for example, state houses and politicians might put pressure on them to do so. So there's a whole political set of issues going on there that people are wrestling with. And I can give you more offline if you're interested. In terms of the countervailing power, Ruth, I think you're absolutely right. The network we're working with, there's a network of unions and nonprofits and people like AFR who are trying to create laws to limit the power of private equity. Elizabeth Warren's Stop Wall Street Looting Act was one example, and of course it hasn't passed. But just to give you an example, there's something called the Ban Surprise Billing Act. I forgot the exact name, which was an issue around surprise medical billing. And
Right.
so without going into the weeds, for those of you who know about this, they were billing done by emergency room staffing organizations that were out of network. And 40% of that market is owned by private equity firms.
Oh, boy.
KKR owning Envision and Blackstone owning Team Health. And so they fought against the No Surprises Act at the national level, and they spent $45 million trying to defeat that legislation. The legislation passed, but it was watered down. So that's the kind of power we are up against. On the tax issue, basically, there's a lower tax rate for what's called carried interest, which is the profits when you sell a company. And there have been many bills to try to reduce that. They have come down. I'm saying I need to act quickly, respond quickly, but the tax rate has gone up for carried interest, but it is still not the same as a corporate rate. And I should let maybe someone else jump in here. The question of how private equity targets companies and whether they have anything in common, I would just say that there's a lot of variation, but the one thing that private equity does is they do due diligence to make sure they are buying out companies with really good fundamentals. And so they don't buy depressed companies or distressed companies like they claim to do. That's like 2% of their investments. So they routinely make sure they're buying good companies with fundamentals, but that may be overpriced or maybe not have a great stock price because they're union wages. So the fundamentals, they always go after companies with good fundamentals. And Huffcore did not have to go under. This was not about globalization. They were a really strong competitive company. And the idea that it's globalization is just doesn't hold water. So I'll stop there. I'm sorry I took a lot of time, but others should jump in or we can take other questions.
I'm going to chime in with two quick points. One is the pension fund question. I wish that were a more edifying story than it is. But the fact of the matter is public pension funds and union pension funds, got interested in private equity as a way to boost returns for their own funds. And, you'll find a revolving door there. You'll find, people from the Clinton administration who, had contact with unions and worked with them to build links with private equity firms and, other revolving doors where state officials administering pension funds get really, well-paid jobs with private equity firms to open doors to them. That's a tough story to read, and I'll put something in the chat momentarily that can give you that story. And the other thing I would say is, from an organizing perspective, it is you're threading when you're working backwards. First of all, you got to find out who the investors are in a private equity fund, and it's not always easy to do because they're not always a matter of public record. OpenGate has a bunch of investors that are rich families from Europe. I learned that from a reporter off the record, but I have no idea who they are. There are several questions as to, what are the legislative options, what are the countervailing power, and I would just stress something is that people are pissed off about private equity. And journalists are aware that private equity is a thing, and that a private equity owned company is different from other companies they've covered. There is a broad awareness of that. And in the case of healthcare, as one person on the call has written a book about, Laura Olson, there's, private equity has really gotten into healthcare. That's really hitting people where it hurts. And many of you may be aware there's been a decades-long discussion about the corporate practice of medicine that the healthcare profession did not like. But there was never any really serious pushback against it until recently, when private equity got into healthcare, in particular into emergency medicine. And at that point, the emergency doctor says, we've had enough. This is the worst manifestation of a disease called corporatized medicine, when it's owned by private equity. And a bunch of them formed a group called Take Medicine Back that is now a pressure group aimed at reforming their profession. So it's this broader awareness translating into action that I think is our best friend under the circumstances.
Can I just add one thing?
This is Laura Olson.
Hi, how are you?
Who wrote the book?
I'm discovering more and more that one of the problems we have with journalists is that their editors always want a balanced story. And whenever I get interviewed by reporters, they always want to know, well, what is good about private equity? And when I try to explain that this is not my politics, this is the playbook of private equity, that their goal is to extract money, as we've been talking about here. Their goal is to make outsized profits and nothing more. They're not interested in the company or anything else. And if you look at their playbook, I try to explain over and over again, there is nothing you can say that's good about them. And they said, well, what about efficiency? I say, yes, you're right, they're more efficient. But if you look at how they're efficient in terms of, let's say, healthcare, the efficiency means lower quality of care. So I think one of the things that the editors of our newspapers have to do is stop pushing their reporters to produce balanced reporting on something that really is not balanced.
Thank you. So Rich Edelman has his hand up. I can't see others. Let me just say that we're approaching the hour, but I'm happy to stay on and we can continue. Those who want to get off, you can feel comfortable getting off. But if there are a handful of people or you want to stay on and have a further conversation, that's great. And we can also, I think that for those of you who are interested in this topic, I think you should maybe send an email to Rich and we can figure out a way to follow up on this conversation. So I just want to, signal that we're close to the end, but I don't want, we're happy to stay on. Rich.
Before we sign off.
You're unmuted.
Yeah. My question is, what's the difference between private equity and hedge funds? Because I was even talking to colleagues today who also said, oh, isn't that the same thing?
No,
Okay.
no.
This is I'll give you a thumbnail. First of all, hedge funds are much larger. They're huge. and they have a much more diverse set of financial strategies. So the part of hedge funds that are closest to private equity are called activist hedge funds. And the essential difference is that they are in and out in like 18 months. So they want to go in, they want to put their money somewhere, but also be able to pull it out. Whereas, and they never buy out an entire company.
Right.
Okay, they will say they have the money to go after larger companies. So for example, Microsoft a few years ago, the hedge fund went in and bought out like, I don't know, it was 3% of the stock, enough to put pressure on Microsoft to change, to have Bezos step down and to change some of the strategies in order for the company to get higher returns, and then they get out. So that's a kind of in and out hitting big companies, major corporations. Private equity is more in a kind of mid-size, even though they're large corporations of several $billion, they're not a Microsoft. So that is the difference. And so you see private equity much more engaged in digging into the actual strategy of the company, as opposed to hedge funds kind of hedging, going in and out. So that's a basic difference, I'll just say right there. And Ruth has her hand up again.
I have two suggestions. Is it time for a flood of op-eds to be written? And also, what foundations might be interested in taking this on?
So again, I can just respond because we've got, Eileen and I have gotten major funding from foundations to pursue our work. We've been doing research on private equity for 10 years. The Omidyar Foundation
Right,
is
very good.
very, very concerned and is focused on funding research on private equity.
They have a great reputation.
Yeah, the
AFR has gotten a lot of foundation funding for its work.
I'm sorry.
AFR has gotten a decent amount of foundation funding in its work. I'm not well versed enough to start naming them, but you know, just as far as exposure goes, whether it's op-eds or whatnot, I mean, this gives me a chance to make a pitch. I'll put my email into the chat if anyone wants to be in touch with AFR. Anytime anybody's working on the subject, and you know, whatever, you're lawyering for a group of workers that's contending with a private equity firm, you know, this is how we've built these partnerships. So anytime you'd like to be in touch, please feel free to get in touch with me, and I'll put my email in the chat here.
Right. So Josh Cherry Theto is on, and I see his hand raised. So Josh?
Yeah, thanks so much, Professor Batt. I'm not going to call you Rose. I take offense to that. Look, I know that there are a lot of venture private equity firms. There's no upside to taking a company and pushing them into bankruptcy. You know, I think it's a wider issue of private ownership of capital. You know, the private system is just never going to monetize externalities. You know, and we're just like in a space where public ownership is not an option. But there's certainly better levers in things like private equity, where you do have the pension funds, you do have stakeholders that have some connection there through governance, as opposed to the Koch brothers or something. If there's just large private ownership, right? Like Crow is not beholden to anyone, like just doesn't care. So, you know, I'd be all for a revolution to make things more public. I think there's a major problem like public ownership of utilities when there's large externalities. Given that that's not the country that we live in, I do think that there's space for engagement. Like there is a lot of talk about responsible investing. There's the UNPRI. There's forums for this type of investment to have engagement. There's no engagement with Koch and Crow and those large owners of equity. So I'd really encourage to leverage some of those spaces, because there certainly are rules of the road. You know, I was a union organizer when I graduated from Cornell. That's why I went to the ILR school. I've spent the last 25 years of my life on the private equity side. So like I see a space where you can do good. I think if you're the owners of equity, you have more say than when you're an employee in a company. So I think there's room for engagement there.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and let me just say, and I'll get to Ruth then next, that, you know, you really do need to separate private equity growth in investing. So there are a lot of small private equity firms that are taking the place of commercial banks because there's no banking system anymore, because banks have become consolidated national behemoths. They will not loan to small businesses. And that is a place where growth, and that is taking private pools of capital, taking a minority stake in a company to provide financing, as long as the owner, as long as the management maintains control over the strategic decisions. That's how I would see it. And if you have that support from private pools of capital to grow businesses, that's substantially different than a leveraged buyout that we're talking about. And so we need to distinguish that. Unfortunately, 80% of the capital is in the leveraged buyout market. So let's turn it to Ruth, and then whoever else wants to jump in here.
No, I had my say already. Thank you.
Okay, you can take down, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should take it
That's
down.
all right. Who else? Carter, do you want to jump in, or is there someone else?
Myra Roomkin, I believe.
Myron,
Myra needs to unmute himself, though.
you're on mute.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Isn't a large share of what the private equity manages to pocket comes in the form of a management fee?
Well, Josh may want to respond. I mean, there's a 2% management fee over 10 years, unless it's negotiated down. And I mean, the way I think about it, if you have 2% of 100 million over 10 years, it's like $20 million, right? And that is money for the private equity firm, as I understand it, to use it to do due diligence, to figure out what companies they're going to buy, to do all that. But Josh may want to jump in here.
Yeah, that ends up being mostly salary. But if you think about 10 years at the numbers you're talking about, 2%, like that's a fraction of the return of a fund. It really is on the capital gains, right? And that's why we talk a lot about carried interest. So the sale of the companies, you know, there used to be more firms that would try to just do like capital, like you'll do a recapitalization or lever up, right, Professor Batt? Like one of the things that makes companies attractive to private equity while we were in 15 years of no interest debt was to find companies that didn't have much debt on them, right? Small business owners, people are pretty adverse to debt. So they'll build up a pretty good business and have no debt on there. And, you know, lenders are willing to give you money at pretty low rates. So some of the things, I mean, that's like Toys R Us, a lot of these, you know, leveraged buyouts. The issue is, you know, recapping an investment, just putting on a ton of debt.
All right. I know we're approaching a little over an hour. Anybody else have anything else to ask or add? Well, if not, I want to thank Rose. I want to thank AFR and all of you who participated in this. I'm glad we could all do this. I want to emphasize again, anybody who has any ideas for future programs, please contact Robert or me or Andrew. And those who want to follow up with Rose, please do that. Anybody wants to funnel questions through me, I'll be glad to do that. Thanks to AFR for the film. And I'm going to mention, I'm going to recommend it to some of my clients to see. So anyway, anybody else have anything they want to add
I-
before we go?
I wanted to
I would
thank
like
you,
to-
Rich. I wanted to thank you, Rich and Rose particularly, and for helping to arrange all of this. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Rose. This is
Charlie.
Great.
I would like to lend thanks to, to some
And
extent.
to
the
Carter,
back
I'm
end-
sorry. Yeah.
The back end here. Thank you to Cornell, for sponsoring this. William Pierre Lewis here at AFR was the communications associate working on this. Amanda, I'm blanking on her last name. She was on, but I think she had to get off.
Well, I want
And
to also thank Amanda for doing
communicate in the
a lot of the
communication department, so that
logistics
was
of
really, really helpful. So thank you all. And, thank you for taking interest.
Good luck